right, you guys. So before we're done with this quarter, I'm going to introduce integers and negative numbers. So our essential question today is, what is a negative number and why do we use them? So I'm going to start with negative numbers. We have all heard of negative numbers before, but we may never have really used them. So a negative number is a number that is less than 0. Okay, some examples of negative numbers are things like -1, -2, -15.5, -2 billion, and 1. Okay. Etc., etc., etc. Okay. Negative numbers are any number that's less than 0. So this basically says that I don't have this item. I owe this item. So negative numbers don't make a lot of sense in a real world context unless you start thinking about money. Okay, so negative numbers are applicable, or they apply to money. Because when you owe money to someone or when you spend money, you're using negative numbers. They're applicable to temperature. Because when you're at a really cold temperature, sometimes it can be negative degrees outside. Negative numbers apply to height. Because in our world, we call sea level 0. And so anything below sea level is a negative number. So as soon as you get into the ocean and you go under the waves, you're at a negative height. Okay. Lending someone something. Because if I have 2 pianos and I lend you one, then that's 2 and then a -1 because I owe you one or I lent you one. There are a lot of other instances where you use negative numbers, but these are some examples, okay? So, as you know, mathematicians like to come up with fancy words for pretty much everything. So, there is a fancy word called whole numbers. And you probably have heard this word before. I'm pretty sure that I've used it. Whole numbers is every single number that doesn't have a decimal or a fraction. It's actually every positive number without a decimal or a fraction component. So whole numbers are like when we count on our fingers. Like when we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., etc. 1, 2, 53, 476. As long as there's no decimal or fraction component, it's a whole number. Okay? That's just the special name for it, which you've heard before. Now, whole numbers are only positive, but there are whole numbers or numbers without fraction and decimal components that are also inside the negative number list. So we call these numbers integers. Okay? An integer are positive and negative whole numbers. All right? An integer is a positive or a negative whole number. So my examples are like 1 and -1, 2 and -2. 57, -57, -3,421, positive 3,421. Okay, these are all integers. Because they're whole numbers, they don't have a fraction component or a decimal component, and they're positive and negative. Are you ever going to just talk to people about integers or whatever? No, probably not. But when you see the word integer, now you're going to know, hey, an integer are just whole numbers that are positive or negative. Okay? So let's do some examples of what integers are. Okay, so I've got 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, I have $42 in my pocket. In the second scenario, I spend $12 on food. So let's talk about these in terms of integers. If I have $42 in my pocket, then this is a positive number. This is positive 42. Or you can just write it as regular 42. You don't have to put the positive number. I spend $12 on food. Well, if I'm spending money, then that's taking away or it's subtracting. So I have a -$12. So these are my integer components.